This is, I think, a very, very interesting session for me as well, because I love Indian cinema, as I'm sure all of you do as well. So, very briefly, I'm going to introduce first Anil and then Siddharth. Anil Zankar is a freelance filmmaker, writer, teacher, and media consultant. He is an alumnus of the Film and Television Institute of India with 33 years of experience in media. He has made 22 short films and won 2 national awards for writing. I'm sure you'll want to know more about him as we go along, and I'll leave that for the final 5 minutes in the question answer. Siddharth Bhatia has been a journalist for over 35 years, working both in India and abroad. He is a regular commentator in newspapers and on television on current affairs, society and culture. He was awarded the Press Fellowship to Wolfson College in Cambridge University in 1990 and made an Associate Fellow of the College in 2001. More about him and his writing, I'm sure we'll find out as we go along. But to begin with, let me just say that the 2 films that they have written these 2 books about are vastly different. Mughal-e-Azam and Amar Akbar Anthony. Now, you know, two movies couldn't possibly be as different from each other. My husband, of course, wrote Pakiza, but he's not here, so we will not be discussing that. So basically, the 2 films, I think, in my mind, are extremely interesting because Mughal-e-Azam was made on this grand, epic scale, and Amar Akbar Anthony may have also been made with the same kind of love, but it is basically just a film that delights and entertains. But I think for me the most important thing is that both films are about a secular vision of India, as you know. You know, one is about Akbar and Jodhan, but of course the main story remains about Anarkali, and Amar Akbar Anthony is a lost and found, the favorite sort of theme for Indian cinema, which has happened forever, about 3 brothers who get brought up by 3 different sets of fathers. Well, you know, they get lost at birth, and one is brought up by a Hindu policeman. The second one is brought up by a Muslim tailor, and the third one is brought up quite delightfully for those who live in Goa by a Catholic priest. And of course, all of you must have heard that lovely number, "My name is Anthony Gonzalez," and I think we'll hear more about that as we go along. So to begin with, let me ask the basic question which always troubles me when we start talking about a film, and that is, where does this film really stand in the whole 100 years of the whole centenary thing? Is this a film that should be really celebrated much more than we have done so far? I know that Mughal-e-Azam has been celebrated in a lot of ways, but is it a film that needs a different kind of a look today, or has it really got its place in history? Over to you, Anil.
First of all, thank you very much for having me here. Thanks to Nandini and her team. And it's wonderful because my roots are here. Many of you would be surprised to know that my mother tongue is Konkani. And I follow Konkani as well as I follow Marathi, except that I don't speak it. I can read it and I can follow it. So Goa is always very special. And Goa has never been a tourist place for me, because our Kuludevata is also here in Goa. Although I'm an atheist, I look at it as a kind of cultural legacy of having here, the food, the cuisine, everything that's here in Goa. So Goa has always been a part of my growing up and subconscious, actually. Although I do not have a single relative here. In fact, my name is also a little odd. You know, for Maharashtrians have this Kar suffix at the end. But ours, we actually reggae derivative of a reggae family. From there it has come to it. That's also reggae, they became Jankars over here. And that in Marathi became Zankar. Because one of our relatives were apparently revenue experts, etc. So they got this title reggae Jankar. So the reggae got dropped somewhere on the line. And we moved to Maharashtra, so that's how. Anyway, so that in a nutshell was my connection to Goa. There's another connection is this thing, the song she mentioned, my name is Anthony Gonzalez, I'm passing my way. That's also a tribute to a great Goan, who was an arranger.
I think we'll leave that to Siddharth. Let's talk about Mughal-e-Azam.
Yes. So coming back to Mughal-e-Azam, I mean, I would like to leave it open because I'm not going to do any reading from the book because it's a 200-page book and it's not like sound bites or anything. I really don't believe in that. And I think, book lover picks up the book after browsing through him, and that's his, I think, right. Only after browsing through the book can you understand, what it is, so one would make up the mind. The interesting thing about happened to me about Mughal-e-Azam is that when I started writing about Mughal-e-Azam, I thought earlier I had written a longish essay, about 5,000 words essay, and then HarperCollins informed me I had approached them with another book, which is in writing now. That's about Mumbai CPSC in film. They said that we are having this series, and there's a format which was given. No other restrictions were given to us. It's like 30,000 words or about theirs, and few photographs are okay. And then we were given the freedom, all of us writers who write in the series, to develop the subject as it went. So, since I had written it earlier, I thought I knew the film very well. And which I did because I've taught this film and I've had a kind of relationship with this film earlier on. And it's actually going against my training in FTI, because FTI in the 60s, 70s when I was studying there, late 70s and 80s, was full of leftist thought, progressive thought, the Indian cinema was bourgeois, and a lot of my professors or others would have been very scandalized at even taking this as a text. However, when things changed and I got out of that and I started using Indian films as text at certain levels, without losing any intensity or my love for word cinema, because cinema is, you have a broader definition. And then I started examining Mughal-e-Azam, then I found that there are many aspects of Indian tradition and Indian culture which the film expressed. It was not just the grandeur, it was just not the money. I mean, nowadays you have films, Mughal-e-Azam was made in 1.5 crores of those days. And incidentally, which was a lot of money. The fact is that it was just not a product of money and grandeur. I mean, you see the richness, obviously, you needed money to realize that. But where does exactly the strength of the film lies is a question that I have tried to answer through this book. And to me, there are very many aspects and a lot of things about Mughal-e-Azam were not known. For instance, hardly in the writing that one comes across, there's generally a passing mention, or not even that, of that it's an adaptation of a play which was written in Lahore, actually, by Imtiaz Ali Taj in 1930. There, the significant departure that the film has made from there elevated it to, it's not a simple adaptation. It's the play itself is based on a legend that has no historical validity. The original playwright says that. In Mughal-e-Azam also beginning they say that. So legend was the starting point, and Asif was able to create an epic. That's therefore the title of my book is Mughal-e-Azam. The subtitle is Legend as Epic. That's how I see, and that sums up my attitude to that. And it began with scripture. There's also one more thing that I'll say, and I stop here for the time being, which is I've written that I say that I dedicate my humble effort towards understanding this epic of Indian cinema to the writers and technical artists of Indian film industry whose contributions do not always get the recognition that they richly deserve. I'll answer this question. If anybody has a question why I've done that, I'll come to it later.
I think now we'll just move on to Siddharth. And so Siddharth, where do you see a film like Amar, Akbar, Antony featuring in these hundreds and thousands of films which have been made in India? Well, and why did you choose it?
Yeah, well, why did I choose it is a straightforward thing. Harper had this series and they said choose something. But they had two conditions. One is that format had to be there. So people say, you've given us a little bit of the story, but that story is to just set up the arc. And the other condition was that please deliver it by tomorrow morning. I actually, strangely, in my case, I did work on this quite fast. I was fortunate that the actors and the technicians were quite cooperative. Where does it stand? Allow me to say, even though I love this movie, and I'm sure I'm simply taken aback at the number of people who always answer the question, have you seen the film? With, of course I've seen the film. What do you mean? That means that because they love it, it's a much loved film, is that despite that, I won't call it one of the classics, not at all. But it's certainly iconic, and that's a big difference. But a classic is something which has many more dimensions. Iconic, it does have flavors and layers and all that, but it stands for something. Secondly, it has travelled over 35 years without losing an inch of its entertainment. Thirdly, if you are ready to accept the argument that cinema should also be entertainment and make you think at a very subliminal level rather than at a more obvious level, then it certainly meets its purpose. So, if this is a movie which is an argument for several things, two of those arguments or three of all of those arguments that I've picked up and gone through, it's an argument for Indian cosmopolitanism, diversity, an India that I must say maybe does not exist anymore, and hark back to a particular time. But it's an argument to say that a good masala entertainer can exist without getting, into vulgarity or something. So this is points I have taken and I move forward with them.
Create, whole spaces that cost millions. I mean, who does that? So if you'd like to just talk a little bit about the difficulties and why do you think he felt this film was so important to make?
Well, it was a passion for him. First of all, the film could be made if it had been a regular kind of industry producer. Mughal Azam would never have been made. Because just to give you one idea of the figure, Bombay Central Station, most of you have seen that, Bombay Central main line station, was built by same Shapoorji Pallonji, and it cost some...
Shapoorji was the producer.
That is the grandfather of the person who is the chairman of the Tatas now. And it cost 1 crore, 1.3 crores. 30 years later, Mughal Azam cost 1.5 crores. That will give you an idea of the cost. Now, quickly, to sum up in a nutshell, actually he started the story first time. The producer was someone, he was a producer called Siraj Ali Hakim, and he began the film in 46. Siraj Ali Hakim owned the famous studios at Mahalakshmi. At the partition he sold off everything and went there, so the film had to be scrapped. So there was a 4-year long wait for him to search for different actors. The principal actor in the meanwhile, Chandramohan, died. Durga Kote was the only person from the old team who continued. Shooting began a year later, he was found. So it took him somewhere, it's not exactly clear, the various versions how he found, but he convinced Shapoorji Pallonji because the weak point of Shapoorji Pallonji was Akbar. And the film is also, it's a love story as in the play, it's about Salim Anarkali. But the title of the film makes it clear where the focus of the filmmaker is Mughal Azam, the greatest Mughal. That's what it says. So it's about Akbar basically, and Akbar is the dominating character in the film. So Shapoorji Pallonji had a weakness for Akbar. So that is one common point. Also culturally, it's a very fascinating thing. I mean, if you look at K. Asif's background, it's quite phenomenal kind of an association. I mean, he was somewhere, I think, from Etawah district. His uncle was a tailor in Mumbai. He came there. Then his uncle also used to do some side roles in films. So he got involved into films. And no sooner had he got there, he wanted to make bigger films and start talking about this great, magnificent dream idea that he had. For such a man to interact and sit with Shapoorji Pallonji, one of the most westernized South Mumbai acts, and a business tycoon and magnate and working together, that itself was, I think, quite a thing. Then, in 51, end of 51, the contract was signed. He asked for a figure, and he gave him some figure, which was never adhered to. The shooting went on and on. After a year, they took about more than a year to decide on the principal character, which was finally played by Madhubala. There were 3, in fact, filmed because of stoppages and other things. Just give you an idea, I mean, the scale of the film was like, it was really like Durga Kote mentions in the autobiography, it was like the Mughal. One division of Indian Army, which was like between 8 to 10,000 men, were fed for 2 months by Shapoorji Pallonji in the Rajasthan desert, the cavalry for the battle scene, which lasts in the film for 7 minutes. So the bill was paid by the producer. No normal producer would have been able to do this. And everything, as if actually it was not a realistic film, but he insisted on getting every single detail. I mean, the costume, the periods, everything from there. And there were 3 versions of the film. And look at, she mentioned about the armor and the chain sequence in the film. Those of you who have seen that would remember. Those were real chains. Those were not fancy chains. And Madhubala was made to wear them and walk them all the time. And there were 3 versions made one after another. The first was Hindi Urdu, then there was a Tamil version, which was made and released also, and there was an English version which was never made and released. But the actors had to mouth their lines thrice. Can you imagine that most of the Mughal-e-Azam has been shot in the night because there was no studio which could accommodate the set. So it had to go on and so on and so forth. So there were several reasons. Then there were stoppages, then there was, the money ran out, then Chapati Pallin said war, then there were some conflicts, like that it went on. So finally the film was released in August 1960. So several reasons took, the scale of production, various other things in between took.
But I think it just shows the passion of the producer. And then Siddharth, moving on to you, the whole story of, if Mughal-e-Azam can be called some sort of a fantasy based in some historical moment in time. Amar Akbar Anthony is just throughout, it's just fantasy. Or do you think there is more to it?
No.
And also, I just wanted to talk about the Goan connection, which we did mention earlier as well, and the characters that appear, which were played by Amitabh, Vinod, and Rishi Kapoor.
Calling it a fantasy would be wrong because it is rooted in this idea of what India is. The fantasy part is because people look at it and say, oh God, look at that miracle. Nirupa Rai gets her eyes back because 2 lights travel from the statue and all that kind of
It's an idol. She goes to a temple to worship and there's light that shines into her eyes. She's blind and suddenly she can see.
I've always interpreted that as a movie device to move forward, to say, okay, she went and got her eyes operated, now move on. But the thing is, it's not really a fantasy as much as good Indian films, 50s, 60s, 70s. The 80s are a very bad decade, and after that things change. But the good Indian film, even now, I'm an entertainer and all that, is kind of rooted in some kind of alternate world that the Hindi film industry has created. So the grammar, the signals, the markers, all of those are immediately known to the audience who's sitting there. So the audience is often complicit in this understanding that story. So there is a story that we have to understand, that this is not about some highly implausible scene happening. I mean, after all, he picked up the idea of 3 kids being left alone in a park by their father from a newspaper cutting. Except that that story was that the father goes to commit suicide, and and the kids are lying there, and then later on the father changes his mind and comes back. Here he said, what if the father did not come back, and the kids meanwhile had been taken by 3 different people? And additional layer to it, what if the 3 people were from different religions? And that, then they grow up in those religions, they meet girls who are from that religion, women who are from that religion. In the end, it is implied that their relationships continue, even though they have been rediscovered by their parents. But nobody says, now reconvert. No one says, okay, so let's all go to the temple, because that could have been one resolution. It's not all that. So it's kind of rooted in an idea of what essentially India's attitude towards pluralism is.
And to Amitabh.
Yeah. Then when he had come up with this, by the way, a lot of people say, why is it Amar Akbar Anthony? Is it some academic got to know I was writing the book? These academics, sorry if any of them. But one academic got in touch with me and said, I'm working on a paper on this and all that, and I think Amar Akbar Anthony is... But one academic got in touch with me and said, I'm working on a paper on this and all that, and I think Amar Akbar Anthony is kept to signify the population ratio, and because it's Hindus, Muslims and Christians. No, you're wrong. Firstly, because it is in a kind of cadence. It works well, short word, long word, longer word. And 2 years or 3 years later, he had a film, Naseeb, in which there is a song John Jani Janardhan, Bachchan playing that, and which is entirely different. So that's not strictly true. Manmohan Desai was a man of the Bombay street. He lived in a very congested part of Bombay. If you know your Bombay, he lived in Khetwadi, which is Girgaon, middle class, solid, old-fashioned middle class area. He used to go down and play cricket with the boys on the street, sit in the Maidan. People used to tell him, he never moved out of there except for 1 year when he became so successful. His son said, you can't possibly live here now, you have to live in the poshest building in the city. And he moved there for a year. A year later, he handed over the key and gave it to his son. He says, I'm moving back. The reason being that nobody knocks the door. He says, nobody ever comes here, so I can't deal with this silence. So he had people on the street whom he saw. One of them happened to be a bootlegger, Bombay's famous, and who used to operate between two buildings, his and the next. And this man is based on that. This character is, the idea of the character is based on that. He was called Anthony Fernandez. And then Pyarelal, the musician, told him that, look, if you are going to do it, I'll give you another name which has got the same kind of rhythm, but it's based on my guru, Anthony Gonzalez, who was my arranger, without whom I wouldn't have understood the notation system. So he said, fine, that doesn't make a difference. I may also just tell you, this is a very interesting thing, that Muslim organizations objected to Akbar singing at an idol. And a lot of Christians wrote angry letters to the Examiner to say that he's making fun of Christians. But he proved, even before the film was made, that that was not true, because he spoke to the leaders and said, this is what I'm putting. It's all there. So I'm promoting my book. And he proved to the Christians, and finally one or two very influential priests spoke to, community leaders spoke to the cameraman, Peter Pereira, and Peter showed them, Peter said, look, he's made this hero, Anthony Gonzalez, into a really kind-hearted, large-hearted, decent man, so you can't possibly object to that, just because he's a bootlegger. So, and the priest is such a kindly character. And there is a bad Christian also, just like there are bad Hindus and there are bad Muslims. So he explained that these are not about those religions, this is not a preaching film, it's not a lecture, it's about the world around us.
Now, both these films have two very, very big actors. I mean, of course, Amar Akbar Anthony had Vinod Khanna and Rishi Kapoor, but it also had Amitabh Bachchan. Would you say this was one of the films that really made Amitabh Bachchan into what?
Well, actually, if you look at his portfolio or oeuvre just before this film, more or less, he rarely sang in films, rarely. Diwar, no song, Zanjeer, no song. All of them, he was angry, he was bitter, he was frustrated, he was intense, and he wanted to go and hit a few people. So that was his persona. To pick up a man like this and to see traces of funny acting in him and a comedian in him, because after this film came out, the parallel track comedian died. Because the hero started doing everything. He became a one-man band. So was something, quite something. We remember this as an Amitabh film, whether we like it or not. Though he's got less songs than Rishi Kapoor has. And I think Akbar is a far more subtle character. There are a lot of nuances to Akbar's character about how his dialogue and all that. But we remember it, so it's really a Bachchan film.
Yeah, and of course I wouldn't say one thespian but two really, because you had Prithvi Raj Kapoor and you also had Dilip Kumar in this film. But I just want to move a little bit between the romantic side, because before we miss out on the romance between Dilip Kumar and Madhubala, so you may want to comment on these two actors and then just talk about the screen chemistry that existed, I think, between the two of them.
Yeah, off-screen chemistry was pretty bad because there was a court case going on and they were doing some of the most romantic sequences in films.
But they had been together for about 9 years before this?
Yeah.
Okay.
And but more than that, I think this film brings to culmination a certain genre, which you see, it is very interesting to talk about this. It's originally, as I told you, it's just a love story, and I got to get, thanks to Shema Zaidi, I got a condensed version of the play. The play is nothing that you see in the film. I mean, it's a scaffolding, and that's where the writers have taken a tremendous contribution. The Akbar, it's a very, very maudlin, melodramatic play which ends in a gloom. Finally, you know, that Anarkali is betrayed, and there's Dilaram, that is the Dilar Sultana's character called Bahar in Mughal-e-Azam. Dilip Kumar strangulates her, then he goes to his father and he looks at Akbar and says that there's blood on your hand. Akbar is shaken, and the play ends in a very gloomy kind of thing, you know. It's that kind of a play. Mughal-e-Azam, actually what the writers have done is that they made Hindustan as the Sutradar and a character. And there's a reason for that, because see, I'll just briefly speak for 2 minutes on this. To me, this was very important in summing up of understanding of historical genre, which was introduced by Sohrab Modi and other people, you know, in the 50s and 60s, worked very well, Tukar, Sikandar and all. And the British government sometimes used a censor because they found a very strong patriotic subtext which the audience read at that time. But after independence, historicals which had, Sohrab Modi and others had excelled actually in that. Prithviraj had also starred in some of them. It suddenly died down because till then patriotism was defined as a kind of along the defined lines. Now that we were independent, the whole Nehru era and the priorities and the agenda changed. You know, very different kind of films that you see in the 50s. And except for one unsuccessful attempt by Sohrab Modi at Jhansi Ki Rani, which flopped, and Anarkali, which ran because of songs, there's no historical at all from 47 to 60. And suddenly at the end of this period, without warning, you have this which is called, in Indian cinema actually we cannot talk of genres really. These are levels that we stick. Like in Hollywood, a musical is musical, well-defined form. A Western will not have songs. Indian cinema doesn't lead to that kind of genre classification. But yet, there was a certain tradition of theatre and the rhetorical theatre which had developed, which you see reflected, and Mughal-e-Azam took it further. Now, a lot of this film's intensity is marked due to the character exchanges. Very, very intense sequences, and some of the best sequences are between Madhubala and Prithviraj, actually. So, Dilip Kumar, a lot of people feel, and I agree with them, is underplayed a little too much. Also, this is one film where the hero, quite unlike unusual for this, it doesn't have a single song to him. It's a romantic film, alright, but there's one song which is of course sung in the background, getting Bade Gulam and other things. So the whole grandness of the film and the atmosphere, which has been set up, the writers have made a major contribution in giving this kind of a framework to the story. You know, and then the set designer, who's never got his due, M. Qadri Sayyed. I tried to search for him. Fortunately, Mr. Khelkar, who did the moldings, you know, the murals of Mughal-e-Azam and the titles, he's still alive, lives in Pune, 86, still active, fantastic hands, fantastic memory, despite paralysis. So he told me about, he confirmed what I felt. You know, that Sayyed was always, he said, making forever sketches, you know, of Mughal architecture and this thing, which I always felt were being used in the film. And those are the kind of things which have added, everything that he chose has added value to the whole thing. You know, later on, but just coming back, ending with my comment on acting, Madhubala and Prithviraj actually have really elevated, have these intense kind of roles that they've taken. And in fact, the first scene of Mughal-e-Azam, if you remember, is that, you know, he walks barefoot at top sun in the desert in Rajasthan. And Asif met Prithviraj walk, and he said, he said, मैं आपके साथ खड़ा रहूँगा, मैं भी जूते निकाल के रेगिस्तान में खड़ा रहूँगा. Prithviraj told him no need for that. He had blisters on his feet, actually. Practiced and that. Then sometimes he will say that whatever you want to do, there's a small anecdote I'll tell you, just to finish this, to give you an idea of Asif's and others' attitude. There was a particular shoe which he wanted, a pearl-laden shoe, Akbar was going to see. And that was going to cost 3,000 rupees, which was a sizable amount in those days. And the production manager said he was going over the top, so he went to Shapoorji Pallonji and it was stuck. So his cameraman R.D. Mathur, another great person, he said that, why do you insist he's not even being seen in frame and close-up? So why do you insist, why can't you do with a less this thing? He says, that you will not see. But you see, when my uncle wears those, his nose have been from Agra and pearl laden, and he's going to walk, he's going to wait and feel every way and upward. And that is what your camera is going to take. He used to sit, and sometimes Dilip Kumar and others used to wait on the sets, and Prithviraj used to say, unko message bhejो, so then he would say, हाँ, आ रहे हैं. So, Asif Saab se bol dijiye, Badshah Akbar aa rahe. and then he had told him actually, though जब से shooting चल रही है, when you are on the shooting schedule, आप घर में गिलास भी नहीं उठाओगे, आप बादशाह अकबर ये कभी नहीं भूलना, आपको गिलास भी उठाना है तो किसी को बुला के उठाए. This is the kind of stories and this is the way these people worked on that.
I'm not sure how much time do we have. Any time for questions?
No, you can carry on for another 10 minutes.
For another 10 minutes, okay.
Yeah, this is the last session.
Yeah, it's last. Okay. So I think I just want to also, because obviously these are two writers who've done, as you can see, a huge amount of research. I mean, there is so much to ask. So I would like you to tell us, is there anything, as he found out, so many sort of hidden nuggets, behind the scenes which were happening. Again, I just want to go back a little bit about the romantic side, because we also know that there was Rishi Kapoor, Neetu Singh, they were together on the set, and as was Parveen Babi and Amitabh Bachchan. I mean, so was there a lot going on behind the set as well, behind the scenes as well?
I was not pursuing that, and nobody talked about it, and nobody volunteered to talk about it.
Yeah.
I think that Rishi Kapoor, Neetu Singh, because they had already worked in about 8 or 10 films by then, and they were imminently getting married. So that spark you can see between them. There are a couple of scenes right in the beginning, that scene when he goes to her just for a fake checkup so that he can meet her. She's a doctor. So you can see those sparks. So I didn't really pursue that. What interested me the most was, talking about behind the scenes, was the fact that Manmohan Desai was making 4 films at the same time. So now imagine that there is a large studio set up in RK Studios in Chembur. He's sitting at the center and ordering his assistant directors from all 4 to say, अच्छा उधर जाके ये कैमरा लगाओ, उधर जाके तुम ये डायरेक्ट करो. And this was going on, so it's like a traffic cop directing 4 movies. So one day his son Ketan, who was his assistant, he was a schoolboy, 16 or 17, but he had been taken on the project. He called his son and he said, go with the editor and do an audit of the shots. Where do we stand, so that I know that we have to shoot a little bit more. So the son came back and said, movie's over. This was 7 or 8 months after they had begun. So he said, how is that possible? How can the movie be over? He said, I have done every shot. So he called the editor. The editor says, they don't have scripts in the cinema, but they do write something. And they have continuity sheets and everything. So he said, no, I have compared it. We have made the movie. So he said, oh, we made the movie. So let's edit. And they started editing. And meanwhile, the other 2 were being shot and edited. There are a lot of commonalities in terms of actors. Neetu Singh is in one other film, Amitabh, Vinod Khanna in another film, etc. So all those were edited. All 4 were hits that year. That was Manmohan Desai's year. And after that, he became this, till then he was just a modest level film director who used to get outside contracts and he used to direct for them. After this, he became this mega star and he became a mega producer, because this is produced by him, much to his own, he was not sure that he should be doing it. And after that, and if I may just add, you reach a peak, after that you start going downhill. All his films after that, he began going downhill for different kinds of ways, and none of the films achieved the same success. But this remained the pinnacle of his career. Actually, in many ways, this is a 70s film.
Yeah, very much a 70s film.
It's bright, it's colorful, terrific songs, breezy, fast, multi-starrer. They were big in those years, if you remember. And people keep asking me, can this film be made today? And I said, firstly, you've got to convince 6 stars to be on the screen and give time to each other. Secondly, you've got to have a director who just has that command. And thirdly, I don't know whether we are in a place as a society to understand some of the nuances of
suspension of disbelief.
Well, we probably reject all the miracles, but the whole Amar Akbar Anthony dynamic, I think the society may not be able to grasp it in the same way as it was done then.
Today we do have directors like Sanjay Leela Bhansali and people like that who do have this kind of slightly more epic version of films that they really want to make. But no discussion on these two films really would be complete without really referring to the music, and especially the music of Mughal-e-Azam, which I think all of us would like to sort of go on singing Pyar Kiya To Darna Kya, and of course all the rest of them. Now I believe there were 20 songs which were recorded, or more than that. And only about 12 were used, or how many were used?
I think 11 or 12 were used. 2 were shot and 2 were recorded, shot, and there were some not used. Totally about 14 or so, not more than that. But, well, it's a whole chapter. You're right about Mughal-e-Azam. It was just not music. The whole thing moved together. Extraordinarily, the music and its picturization of Asif. I think I will stick my neck out and say that in Indian cinema, there are 2 directors whose sense of musicality, not music per se, musicality in terms of time and musicality, what it constitutes in cinema, was par excellence. And they were completely different schools. One was Satyajit Ray, and second is K. Asif. I mean, I know Raj Kapoor, Gurudutt, Bimal Roy were excellent picturizers of music. But K. Asif was still a cut above, I feel. And the way he's
Naushad, Naushad is very, very good.
I'm talking about directors.
Yeah.
Naushad's music, the way it comes in, the way it picturized, particularly the songs and the understanding of the moment that Asif had, particularly Bade Ghulam Ali Khan's songs, the 2 songs that which is done. Classical music to be dealt with that kind of a manner, the broken thing, and then its song resumes, and the lay, what we call in India, it's a very difficult word to translate in English because it also means rhythm, it means continuity, it means it's a very rich word. He had that fantastic understanding, along with Rai, I would say, of that. So the entire film is so, shall I say, so well composed in terms of time, in terms of, the stasis movement, there's nothing arbitrary in Asif's
And they're beautifully picturized. And anything you would like to say about the music of Amar Akbar Anthony?
Well, as you know, in fact, all 3 films tell us one thing in common, that good music lasts. Because if you were to ask there are hardly any nostalgia radio channels anymore. They play it in the evening sometime. There's a little bit on television. But people know them. A youngster today who's sort of interested in cinema will know Mughal-e-Azam's songs. And of course Amar Akbar Anthony also. Pakiza, they would know. Because some songs, just like some movies, travel over decades, over generations, and they touch that listener.
But it's a completely different genre of music. I mean, Lakshmikant Pyarelal composed a completely different to what Naushad had done. So it's
in the sense, yes, of course. But the songs fit the story.
Fit the story, and yet you feel they have lasted. I mean, that is, My Name is Anthony Gonzalez, or,
I was quite surprised to see that it has a remix also somewhere. In fact, of course, remixes are made for a lot of songs, but I was quite pleasantly surprised. So there are some iconic songs, marker songs of that decade or something, which stay on, and then now get a new lease of life as.
But the lyrics of Shakil Badawi are much different. Sorry,
one point of music. What Naushad has said is very significant. He said that people said the songs, and he's described in a very interesting interview, his comparison with C. Ramachandran, how they set standards, the healthiest of competitions that they had between the 2 of them. And the Anarkali song had gone, so he knew that, he said that the standard was already set, Anarkali was released earlier. In a similar situation, I had to come up with something which is, he doesn't say to surpass him, but to match him, showing the kind of respect that he had. And he says that, but actually after describing all the songs, etc., which I have in detailed account, in that, he says, in the end, what really tested me was the background music. And before Naushad Saab came on the scene, background music were random pitches, and things which were like picked up from here and there. He was the first one who taught people to say that background music is as important. And he says that the background music really tested me. And he said that basically the film, Swabha of the film is Darbari Kannada, which set the mood for the titles. And he said that every background score which I have used corresponds to the raga of the day. And he said, not a single music critic has pointed this out. You know, till then. And he said, that is what tested me. And he goes on to say that I'm waiting for a film someday where a producer comes to me and says, Naushad Saab, isme gana nahi hai, but it will have only background music. He said, I'll be very happy to do it.
Okay, I think let's open the floor up for a couple of questions. Oh, sorry.
No, I
Please.
just wanted to say that Anthony Gonzalez is actually a tribute to a Goan.
Yeah, that they had mentioned. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He just
yeah.
died recently.
Yeah, just right recently. Okay, thank you everybody. The books are there, the authors are there. Please go ahead and get them signed and buy them. And thank you very much. And a round of applause for them.